We're now going to pattern our high part structure using the two most commonly used methods for creating patterns in NDN, and those are auto width and the semi-auto features. So I'm going to come over to the pattern environment, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn off everything I don't need to see. Now that we're in patterning, I don't need to see my struts. I'll turn those off down here at the bottom. I also don't need to see my cables. I just want to get a good look at my membrane. I'll go ahead and rotate the structure a little bit, do a zoom extent so I can see everything clearly. I also want to go ahead now and take a look at my roll width. So I'll look back at my setup. Since I'm going to use the auto width feature, that depends heavily on the dimensions for your roll width. So everything looks good here. I'll click OK. Now we can come over and go into our Add Pattern section. In the pattern environment, the very top button, Add Pattern. Let's start off with auto width. I'll come down, I'll click on the auto width add method, and now you'll see some information here. Most of this was set up in the setup that we did for patterning, which we already covered. Pretty much you can just leave this set as the default unless you know you have a specific reason why you'd like to change it. I'll go ahead and click Next. And now it'll tell you down here at the bottom, you can select 2 nodes to create a generated seam or 3 nodes for a traced seam. So if you select 2 nodes, NDN will cut a straight line between those 2 nodes and that'll be your seam. Or you can select 3 nodes so that NDN will trace a line along your membrane to create that seam. So I'm going to select 3 nodes here. I'm going to put my first seam right down the middle of my structure. So I'll select my first node, second node, third node. As soon as I select that third node, NDN automatically lays down the seam. Now I simply need to select a direction node. I'll come off to the right, so I'll select this node out here at the far right hand corner, and as soon as I do, NDN will start creating that pattern. You can see it's going through iterations. Okay, it's finished my first pattern. Now for my second pattern, I simply need to right click once to select the new seam as the seam where it will start again. Right click, creates my next pattern. Right click, get my third pattern. Right click, right click, right click, right click. Keep going until you hit the end. All right, let's see if it'll do this last one. Okay, no, it didn't, and that's what I was expecting. So when you're using the auto width feature, NDN is going to look to lay down a seam for every pattern it creates. Since this right down here ends in this point, NDN wasn't able to draw a line seam there, so it went ahead and it just ended. It said it couldn't create that pattern. But that's okay, because now this section is where we'll go in and we'll demonstrate the semi-auto feature for creating a pattern, which is the second easiest way to create patterns. So let's click Finish, come back up to Add Pattern, and this time we'll go into semi-auto. Okay, again, we can leave all this information set as the defaults here. Go ahead and click Next. And we have the exact same thing again. 2 nodes for a generated seam, 3 nodes for a trace seam. So let's zoom in here a little bit, and you'll notice that we only have nodes at each corner. So we can't select 3 nodes along any edge. So I'm going to select, go to Next, 2 nodes along each side since that's all we can do. So I'll select my first node, my second node, right click. Not only does this generate my first seam also sets my warp orientation. You'll also notice in the info box to the right that it says seam was matched to neighboring panel. NDN could see what we were trying to do and matched up our seams so we wouldn't accidentally have a gap between our patterns. So I've got my first seam. NDN remembers where you left off, so I don't need to click this node again. I can click the node for my next edge, right click, generates that line. NDN knows where we left off. I can click my final node, which will close the loop, and as soon as I do, NDN will generate the pattern. Perfect. I've got my pattern. The white arrow represents the warp orientation, which is along my first seam. We can go ahead and click Finish, do a zoom extent. All right, we can see that we've generated all of our patterns along this side of the structure. Now this is a symmetric structure, so there'd be no real reason to do this other side, but just for demonstration, I'll go ahead and do that. Rotate my structure. Okay, let's click Finish here, go back and add patterns. We'll start again with the auto width. Click Next, and I will click my 3 nodes. Okay, there's my first seam. Click a direction node. All right, right click, right click. Okay, we'll run through this real quick until it can no longer do it. Okay, perfect. Finish. Zoom in down here. Go back to add pattern. I'll do my semi-auto. Click next. Set my first seam. Right click. All right, done. Click finish. Let's do a zoom extent. All right, now we have patterns for this entire structure. Now in the next video, we'll go in and show you how to review these, make any little changes you want. For right now, we've got our initial patterns all set up and ready to go.